What if your greatest wounds are also your greatest teachers? There are planets in the birth chart that no one wants to talk about. Not because they are unimportant. Quite the opposite. They are the most important placements in the chart for understanding why certain patterns repeat, why certain areas of life feel perpetually difficult, why the same wound keeps appearing in different forms across decades of living. They are the placements that describe not your gifts, not your strengths, not the qualities you came here to express, but the places where life has applied, and will continue to apply, the most sustained and unrelenting pressure. They are the shadow planets, Saturn, Pluto, Chiron, and what they reveal about the nature of growth, of suffering, of the relationship between wound and wisdom, may be the most practically useful thing that astrology has ever offered. Because most people relate to difficulty the way they relate to an enemy, something to be overcome, escaped, medicated, distracted from, or at the very least endured until it passes. The assumption is that difficulty is an obstacle to the life you want, something standing between you and the version of yourself that would exist if only circumstances were different, if only certain things had not happened, if only the pressure would finally let up. But what if difficulty is not the obstacle? What if it is the path? This is the question that Saturn, Pluto, and Chiron force you to sit with. Not as a philosophical abstraction, but as a lived reality, in the specific areas of your chart where they are placed, in the specific themes of your life where their energy is concentrated, in the specific moments when their transits activate and everything that was manageable suddenly becomes urgent. Saturn is the planet of structure, discipline, time, and consequence. In mythology, Saturn is the god of harvest, the principle that you reap what you sow, that nothing is given without effort, that the universe is ultimately just in the most demanding and unromantic sense of the word. Saturn does not offer shortcuts. It does not reward potential. It rewards only what is actually built, actually practiced, actually earned through sustained engagement with reality as it is rather than as you wish it were. And Saturn in the birth chart shows exactly where this principle is most active in your life. Where Saturn is placed, by sign, by house, by the aspects it makes to other planets, is where you feel most limited, most challenged, most acutely aware of your own inadequacy. It is the area of life where things do not come easily, where early experiences of failure or restriction left a mark, where the inner critic is loudest, where the fear of not being good enough is most persistent. But it is also, and this is what most people never discover, the area of life where the deepest and most lasting mastery is available. Because Saturn's gifts are real. They are simply expensive. The person with Saturn in the fifth house, the house of creativity, joy, and self-expression, often spends the first half of their life feeling blocked creatively, unable to play freely, carrying a deep sense that their expression is somehow not enough, not worthy, not permitted. But the artist who has worked through Saturn in the fifth house has developed something that the naturally gifted, easily expressive person often lacks: a relationship with their craft that has been tested, that has survived failure and doubt and the temptation to give up, that rests on a foundation of genuine work rather than effortless talent. Saturn does not give you the easy version. It gives you the real version. And the real version, once earned, cannot be taken away. The person with Saturn in the seventh house, the house of partnership and relationship, often experiences the most painful lessons of their life through close relationship. Early experiences of loss, of unavailability, of partners who were cold or absent, or demanding in ways that felt impossible to meet. A persistent fear of commitment or of being truly known. A sense that love requires more effort from them than it seems to from others. But the person who has done the Saturn work in the seventh house has developed a capacity for genuine partnership, for the kind of relationship that is not based on need or fear or the unconscious repetition of early patterns, but on choice, on mutual respect, on the willingness to do the hard work of actually knowing and being known by another person. Saturn's lesson is always the same, regardless of where it falls. Stop avoiding the area of life where you feel most inadequate. Go toward it, do the work, and trust that the difficulty is not evidence of your inadequacy. It is the mechanism through which genuine mastery is forged. Pluto is a different order of planet entirely. Where Saturn operates through structure and discipline and the slow accumulation of consequence, Pluto operates through transformation and annihilation and the sudden, total collapse of whatever has outlived its truth. Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth. Not metaphorically, but in the most literal psychological sense. The death of an identity, the collapse of a belief system, the end of a relationship, a career, a version of yourself that you had built your entire life around. Pluto does not renovate. It demolishes, and then from the rubble something new becomes possible that could not have existed without the destruction. Where Pluto is placed in the birth chart, and especially where Pluto has been transiting over the course of a life, is where the most radical transformation is concentrated. The area of life where the deepest power dynamics play out, where control and surrender are most acutely felt, where the shadow, in Jung's sense, the parts of the self that have been denied, suppressed, or projected onto others, is most concentrated and most insistent on being integrated. Pluto transits are the great initiations of a life. When Pluto conjuncts the natal sun, the identity itself is dismantled and rebuilt. When it transits the 7th house, relationships that were built on unconscious foundations are exposed and often ended. When it crosses the mid-heaven, the entire career and public identity may collapse, not as punishment, but as the necessary clearing of space for something that is more genuinely one's own. The person who has survived a major Pluto transit has been through something that cannot be explained to someone who has not experienced it. A kind of dying, a dissolution of something so fundamental that the self that existed before the transit seems, in retrospect, like someone else entirely. And what emerges from that dissolution, when it is met with consciousness rather than resistance, is a kind of power and authenticity that was not available before. Not the power of control or dominance, but the power of someone who has been to the depths and returned, who has nothing left to protect, who knows from the inside what they are made of. Pluto's gift is the gift of genuine transformation, but it is never given gently. Chiron is the most personal and the most tender of the three. In mythology, Chiron was the wounded healer, the centaur who was struck by a poisoned arrow and could not die, but could not fully heal either, who carried a wound that never closed, and who became, through the very fact of that wound, the greatest healer in the ancient world, the teacher of heroes, the one who understood suffering not from a distance, but from within it. Chiron in the birth chart shows where this principle is alive in your life. Where Chiron is placed, by sign, by house, by aspect, is where you carry a wound so deep, so early, so central to your sense of self, that it does not feel like a wound. It feels like a fact, not something that happened to you, but something that is simply true about you. The part of yourself that you have concluded, usually very early and very quietly, is simply broken, unlovable, inadequate, defective in some way that cannot be fixed. The Chiron wound is not dramatic in the way that Pluto wounds are dramatic. It is quiet. It is the thing you never say out loud. The person with Chiron in the 2nd house carries a wound around worth and resources, a deep, persistent sense that they do not deserve abundance, that money will always be a source of pain or shame, that their value as a person is somehow fundamentally in question. This wound often originates in early experiences of material deprivation or messages received about what they were worth, and it tends to manifest as a pattern of under-earning, of self-sabotage around money, of an inability to receive that is so deeply habitual it feels like personality. The person with Chiron in the 4th house carries a wound around home and belonging, a sense that they never quite fit anywhere, that the place that was supposed to be safe was not, that the foundation that should have been solid was somehow absent or unreliable. This wound often creates a lifelong search for home, in relationships, in places, in spiritual traditions, that never quite resolves because the home that is being sought is not external. But here's the extraordinary thing about Chiron. The wound is also the gift. The person with Chiron in the second house, who has spent decades navigating a painful relationship with worth and resources, often becomes the one who can genuinely help others transform their relationship with money, with value, with what they deserve. Not because they have solved the wound, but because they have lived inside it long enough to understand it from the inside. The person with Chiron in the fourth house, who has spent a lifetime searching for belonging, often becomes the one who creates belonging for others, who builds communities, who holds space, who offers the kind of unconditional welcome they themselves have always longed for. Not despite the wound, through it. This is what the wounded healer means. Not that the wound is healed and then the healing begins, but that the wound itself, when it is met with consciousness and compassion, rather than shame and avoidance, becomes the very thing that allows you to reach others in the place where they are most wounded. Your deepest inadequacy is also your deepest gift, not because suffering is romantic or meaningful in itself, but because the specific way you have suffered, the specific contour of your wound, is the specific thing that qualifies you to meet others in that same place. Saturn, Pluto, Chiron, structure, transformation, wound. The three great teachers of the birth chart, not the ones you would have chosen, but perhaps the ones you needed. And in the next video, we will explore one of the most misunderstood cycles in all of astrology, the Saturn return. The moment, around the age of 29, when Saturn completes its first full orbit of the birth chart and returns to the place it occupied at the moment of your birth. The transit that astrologers have associated, across cultures and centuries, with the first genuine confrontation with adulthood, with the end of the life you inherited and the beginning of the life you choose. The Great Reckoning.